5.1 surround sound. Oh, it's wonderful. I love it. And I hope a lot of people are really getting into listening to music in surround, because it's a whole different thing. But what is it? This is the issue here. Okay, very brief explanation on 5.1. You have 5 speakers which are arranged in a pattern around the listener. There is a very specific way they should be placed, but we won't get into that right now. And then there's the point 1. What does the point 1 mean? The point 1 is the sub, or the low frequency effects speaker. And this is typically one box, maybe 2, but it's one channel. It's very important to remember that all low frequencies are basically mono. Stereo doesn't exist. I don't know exactly the frequency where the crossover is, but anything under 200 hertz is going to go into mono, basically. It's physics. That's just the way it is. So by being able to use smaller speakers, which we call satellite speakers actually, you can then take all the bottom information, typically, depending on the format, 120 hertz or 80 hertz, and you take that away from your satellite speakers and you throw it into one speaker, into a sub, which can be anything. I think I've seen 8-inch subwoofers for homes anyway. We normally use 12 or maybe 2 12s mounted kind of like this in the box, or 15. You can even have 18s. They don't have to be huge. And they also can be placed anywhere in the room. It's mono. It's a radiation. That's really what it is. And typically, most manuals, when you buy a home theater system, will say, just walk around with the thing and place it wherever you think it sounds best. And then you can adjust your level. So that's kind of a down and dirty explanation of 5.1. Apparently, Walt Disney, when he was making Fantasia, is the first person to experiment with multiple audio tracks in a film, on an actual piece of film. It was called Fantasound. Now, I'm not quite sure. I think there were 7 audio tracks. I may be wrong here. And I'm not exactly sure how they placed them in a theater, but apparently there was, I would imagine in Hollywood, a version of Fantasia which had some sort of surround sound. And I know the Philadelphia Philharmonic, who was the orchestra, they had to do certain passes recorded kind of twice so they could position the orchestra in different places. They even used a click track, which is quite kind of interesting. This is 1940. So I don't know what they were doing or how they were doing it. I'm sure it's very basic, but that's, from what I know, is probably the earliest form of surround. Theater, obviously, movie theater is where it was used to start with. Really, it was Dolby Laboratories who discovered, by using 3 speakers, you could isolate the soundtrack and sound effects from the dialogue. The dialogue essentially is always mono. You can move the dialogue around, sure, but generally, even nowadays, most theaters you go to, it's a center speaker. In fact, actually, they have 5 speakers along the front in big theaters. So that was really, I guess, the start of the whole surround thing. It was more for movies. Then, I believe, I remember this, mid-70s. I remember the quadraphonic record. And I also remember going into a lot of studios which were being rebuilt in London, which had 4 speakers, 2 in the front, 2 in the rear. I remember distinctly the Who studio, Ramport. They had, if I remember correctly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 JBL 4320s. I think that was the name of the, it was like a 115 and a tweeter and a mid-range. 12 of these things arranged in some sort of quadraphonic. We didn't call it surround then, it was called quadraphonic. And I guess that's when engineers and producers started mixing certain records in quadraphonic. For some reason, never caught on, but it was quite amazing that a piece of vinyl with a quadraphonic cartridge could actually produce 4-channel music, which is amazing. I remember you used to get these joysticks. I heard Billy Cobham's Spectrum on a quadraphonic system, and this guy was kind of demonstrating with his joystick, sending Billy all around the room like this. Fascinating. And then we got into this 5.1 surround, which I think is, I may be wrong, but I think it's 90s. I'm assuming like 92, 93. And there's all sorts of formats. There's Dolby, and they have various formats. There's DTS, they have various formats. And then, of course, there's the audiophile formats. There's DVD-A and SACD, which is all surround. It can be stereo too in the case of SACD, very high quality. But these are all these different formats, and it's very confusing. And even as someone who mixes in surround, I'm still confused by it. And I think we're all dabbling a little bit in the dark, just like when stereo first came. Engineers, where do they place the drum kit? In those days, it was kind of far left or far right or center. That's all you had. It's a little bit like that at the moment. There are rules, basic rules, but we're still finding out what works best, and also the type of music. And what you're going to be listening to is, I guess, my concept or approach to mixing music that was recorded in a very stereo fashion and trying to break it out into surround. And hope you enjoy it. Okay, speaker placement. All right, here we have our center speaker. Here we have our left front speaker. Here we have our right front speaker. And then if I turn around, here's my right surround. Here's my left surround. And my head usually sits about there. And of course over there is the sub. And they are meticulously placed with a tape measure and a protractor. That's basically 30 degrees from center, 30 degrees from center, 120 degrees, and 120 degrees. And like I said, with the subwoofer, I kind of just marched all the way around the control room trying to find a good place for it. I'm very aesthetic. I like things to look right, so I like it to be in the front. But I keep kind of moving it closer to the desk and further away to figure out the best place for it. Like I say, it's a radiation of low frequency, and it's mono as well. So now, how do I go about placing some music or some material recorded in 1992 very much in stereo? Well, there are a few factors to consider. And by the way, this is just my concept. Everybody has a different take on this. And I'm not saying nothing is right, nothing is wrong. It's just a question of concept. You're watching a video, so therefore you do have, as you see the screen, not in all shots, mind you, but in most of the shots, you've got the drum kit, the drummer, me, sitting in the center. You've got the bass player, Anthony Jackson, set up to the left. You've got the guitarist, Ray Russell, set up to the right. So what I thought was, I can't do a mix where I follow all the camera angles. It wouldn't sound very good because you'd have to keep changing your positions. It would be a joke, really. So what I did was I positioned Anthony a little bit as you see him, just left of center. I positioned Ray just right of center. Now the drum kit, well, that I kind of took a little bit of artistic license with, because it'd be kind of boring if it was just straight down the middle. I've considered this, and I thought, even though you're looking at the picture from the front, I've actually positioned the drums from the drummer's perspective. When I mix in stereo, I actually prefer audience perspective. I always like my hi-hat on my right, which some people might find that strange as I'm a drummer, but from an engineering point of view, that's just how I hear it. I can make that kind of metamorphosis very quickly. But I decided for this to place the drummer, you, on the drum kit as though you were playing the drums. So essentially, your right cymbal or mine? My right cymbal is now to your left. So as I'm facing the speakers, there is my right cymbal. Here are my octabands, and my tom-toms go from high to low to the gong drum over here. That's the concept. Now, this was recorded in 1992. I believe we used a 24-track machine, so that gives us 23 available audio tracks for a large drum kit, bass, stereo guitar, and a bunch of keyboards. I believe the drum kit, it was only on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tracks. That's the whole drum kit. Now, that doesn't give me a lot to play with. What that really means is you've got both kick drums are on one track, snare drum is on one track, the hi-hats get their own tracks because I wanted to be able to pan them and have control over them. The overheads have 2 tracks, and everything else occupies 2 tracks. So that's 4 octabands, 6 tom-toms, piccolo snare drum, and a gong drum. That's kind of difficult to deal with. So I will go into that a little bit later about how I kind of cut them all out and place them. But with a little bit of trickery, what I've tried to do is create the drum kit as though it were recorded the way I would record it now for surround. I'd give every drum its own channel so I can position the drum kit just like I'm sitting at the drum kit, which is pretty cool. It's a pretty nice sound. So that's the concept. Within that, there's the keyboards I kind of have fun with. Most of the keyboards, because it's not a player, they were all my parts which I sequenced. So there's no featured keyboard player. So I've decided to put them at the back. To me, that's kind of where I've taken the surround. It's almost like you have the 3 live players and you have the machinery at the back, the MIDI information. And to me, that's the concept I've used for this mixing. Well, we'll see. Hope you like it. Okay, now to get a little more technical about surround mixing. Let's start with the actual setup and the speakers themselves. Typically, for studios and engineers mixing in surround, you like to have 5 identical speakers and your point 1 and your sub. Here's the first problem with mixing in surround on 5 identical speakers, which, by the way, have been calibrated to exactly the same level. And there's a few different calibrations to use too. But I'm just going to concentrate on what I'm doing and how I'm approaching it. I've basically calibrated to 80 decibels of pink noise and lined up each speaker to the same level. Okay? So, unfortunately, not everybody, not all consumers have a surround system that has 5 identical speakers. Generally, their left and right are their main speakers. Their center speaker usually is kind of this way, and it's a different makeup of speaker, has different units in it. The surrounds are generally a little bit smaller. So we've already got a little problem, even though if you follow your manual, how to set up your home theater system and calibrate it with your Radio Shack decibel meter. Yeah, I mean, assuming you do that, which is advisable, there's still a character difference in the type of speakers. Now, we have to take that into consideration when we mix. And I think one of the biggest talking points debated, let's say, amongst engineers is this center speaker. Okay? Now, there is a thing called phantom placement and direct placement. Direct placement is when you take a signal, let's say the snare drum, and you put it in that center speaker. Phantom center is when the snare drum is not in the center speaker, it's in the left and the right speakers panned in the middle. They sound different, believe it or not. Now imagine if we place the snare drum in the center speaker, and I set it at a certain level so it sounds good in here, but you have a home theater system that has a tiny little center speaker, what's going to happen to the sound of the snare drum or the level of the snare drum? It's going to be totally different. So we have to compensate for that a little bit. So there are a lot of concepts of how to use the center speaker. You have to be very careful with it. There's also the concept, generally you put a vocal, if I were singing, maybe my vocal would go in the center. There's a lot of singers that don't like the idea of consumers being able to solo their voice without anything around it. So there's a lot of issues to think of and take care of. So what I've done, especially with like the kick drums and the snare drums, is I've used my phantom center, but I've also put a little bit in the center speaker just to basically use that speaker. I feel it's there to use. There's a lot of people that mix it hardly even use the center speaker because they think music sounds better without it. It's debatable, but for the purpose of this project, I'm trying to use as much center as I can get away with. Same with the surrounds. My concept is to put main program in those surrounds to make it an exciting experience. So that's really where I'm at in terms of the discrete and direct panning and phantom placement of instruments. Essentially, I've got my kick drum, my snare drum in the center of the stereo picture. I've got the overheads actually panned a little bit in between the surround, the left surround and the left front and the right surround and the right front to try to give you a feeling that you're in the drum kit. I have the tom-tom tracks a little bit in front to give you the feeling of the tom-toms moving around. And then, of course, I've done a little bit of trickery with the help of Pro Tools, digital audio, where I've actually taken individual drum hits and placed them around the surround parameter. The gong drum. That's basically it. Ambience, reverb. It's really quite helpful for us to use a surround reverb because you may play something in the middle here, whether it be center or whether it be phantom center. But it's also nice, if you were in a hall and somebody hit a snare drum on the stage, you hear it from all around you. And that's the great thing about using a surround ambience or surround reverb. So I use a mixture. I've probably got on the drum kit probably a couple of surround verbs. One is a 5.0 because I'm not sending anything to the sub in the reverb. One is a 4.0, which means it misses out the center. And I even have a stereo reverb in there as well. The snare drum, for example, is sent to the stereo reverb, just left and right, and the 5.0. The tom-toms are sent to the 5.0 and a 4.0 too. So, and it's just careful manipulation of levels and placements of the signal versus the returns from the reverbs that give you this kind of feeling that you're in the middle of the drum kit, and you're also maybe playing a drum kit in a hall too. So it sounds like a bigger room than this room, for example. I use some delays on some of the instruments, which you would use in a regular stereo mix anyway, except instead of them all being at the front, I pan them around to the back. And this kind of makes for a more, let's say, organic mix, makes it all sound like it's all coming from the same source. And that's my concept anyway. Here's a drum kit. Anthony Jackson, pan a little to the left. Ray Russell to the right and over here. These are all the keyboards. DX5 over there, JX10, brass over there. Got an acoustic piano this side, we've got an electric piano that side.